Yes, thank you very much. Well, welcome to Critical Thinking, How to Develop a Crucial Leadership Skill. I'm sure you recognize the sculpture there to the left of the title. The name of the sculpture is The Thinker. And the purpose of this webinar is to explore the subject of critical thinking in a way that encourages you to intentionally become critical thinkers, all of us. My name is Dr. Paul Greasley, and I bring you greetings from Palm Beach, Florida. And you can see the photograph here on the bottom left side there. And this photograph was taken just after dawn as the sun was rising over the Atlantic Ocean. The climate here in South Florida is warm and humid most of the year, and we have that constant threat of hurricanes during the summer months. Madinah, on the other hand, has a very different climate for sure. Yesterday, I was looking at the weather in Madinah and noted that the average summer temperature is around 43 degrees Celsius. It's never been that here in Florida. Well, we do share something in common, and we both can enjoy our wonderful palm trees. So welcome and greetings from Palm Beach, Florida. Please note the words under my name that say, in leadership development, theory shapes practice, and practice informs theory. The webinar today will be a mixture of both theory and practice. In the vast arena of leadership development, we need theory so that we can shape the things that we do in practice. And of course, we need practice so that we can inform and formulate theory, which then again shapes our practice. And so it goes in a cyclic fashion. Moving then to page 2, you see here an outline for our webinar this morning, or this evening, depending on your time zone. I would like you to consider our time together as kind of a conversation, even though I can't see you and you can't see me. And you'll see what I mean by this as we progress through the webinar together. I'd like to pause here for just a moment and thank Roveda Kazmi and Ali Jaffrey for their efforts to enable our time together. I'm very thankful for the modern communication technology that we enjoy. And of course, our host was instrumental in making all this happen for our benefit. And so I say thank you very much. Let's look at our outline here on page 2. We're going to start with an introduction, and then we're going to discuss a little bit about scholarship and critical thinking. We'll then move into a definition of what is critical thinking. And then we'll start that conversation that I alluded to before and have a demonstration where we'll all have a chance to think critically. We'll then move into the leadership development part of the webinar where we will define a leader and what is leadership. Then we'll look at the elements of critical thinking, and then we'll each have the opportunity to start working on our critical thinking skills in the way of formulating a critical thinking action plan, one that you can continue thinking about today and then download the presentation when it becomes available and work on in the future. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll actually have a critical thinking story that I think you will all enjoy. So hang in there with me and enjoy the story that I share with you at the end, and then connect the dots to our own organizational leadership. And then we'll conclude. I'm really looking forward to our time together this morning. You can see the sculpture there on the right side of the thinker, called The Thinker. I draw your attention to the sculpture because it is a very unusual sculpture. Here sits a man thinking, but his muscular body was not developed in this quiet and contemplative position. The muscular definition that we see here was shaped and formed during times of intense physical activity. But here we see him thinking. And our webinar is all about thinking, critical thinking. So it's an interesting situation here that we see something that looks like it should be in motion and active, and yet it's sitting in a quiet and contemplative state. Moving to page 3. We start with a basic assumption, and that assumption says thinking precedes all actions or behaviors. thinking precedes all actions or behaviors. It's a very basic assumption, but is a most important key to unlocking, understanding, and applying the notion of critical thinking. We see the outline of a man's head, and inside of that head is his brain, and that brain is composed of a word cloud of different thoughts. I really enjoy word clouds, and we'll be looking at several of those during the webinar. But here we see this brain full of very positive thoughts, creativity, hope, ideas, dreams, goodness, faith, meditation, and other things that are full of thoughts. But these are only thoughts. But our assumption is that our thoughts then result in actions or behaviors. The quote at the bottom of page 3 is also very interesting. John Locke, the English philosopher, said several hundred years ago, "I have always thought the actions of men the best interpreters of their thoughts." I make the assumption also that all of us here on this webinar speak more than one language, and we understand the business, the activity of interpretation. We appreciate that you cannot always get the exact sense of a word, the sense of a meaning when you go from language to language, culture to culture. And so it is that our actions need to be interpreted. And the actions of those that we see around us are interpreted, according to John Locke, by their thought processes. And I think it's true. Our thoughts reveal, our actions reveal our thoughts. A basic philosophy, a basic assumption, a basic premise that we begin with. And the better we understand that, the more impactful this webinar will be in our world. I have a friend who tells me this. He says, the only reason to give a presentation is to change the world. Really? I said, well, think about it. Yes. If this webinar influences how you think, and I trust that it will, and your thinking then changes your actions and your behaviors, and this is our basic working assumption, then we have the potential to change the world in which we live. Locke was right on. He said that our actions reveal our thoughts. So consider this webinar the beginning of a global change in our thinking and therefore how we respond to the things in our world, what we do. Moving then to the next page 4. Page 4 says, well, here's a corollary assumption, and it goes like this. Therefore, to improve the quality of our actions, we must improve the quality of our thinking. Simply, deceptively simply, to improve the things that we see around us and the things that we do, all we need to do is change our thought processes. If we look at this conversely, we'll come up with this. we will look at something that didn't turn out as expected. We'll look at something around us that maybe we would call failure. And we think in the process of evaluating that experience, that failure, that thing that didn't turn out quite as well as we thought that it might, and we say, if only I had thought about that differently, the result would have been different. And it's true. You know, if we would have thought different things, then our actions and our behavior would not have resulted in less than our desired result. So deceptively, all we need to do is change the quality of our thinking to improve the quality of our lives, our behaviors, our actions. So, critical thinking is both science and art. It is an art to practice in our daily lives, as well as our organizational lives. Critical thinking is applicable in all the things that we do in all the parts of our lives. It is applicable both at the individual level and the organizational level. Critical thinking is a skill, a learned skill, a skill that can be taught and enhanced over time. Critical thinking is a science that can be researched and studied in various settings, and let's do that. Let's look at some research that has been conducted in Saudi Arabia over the last several years, and it was not difficult to find this scholarly research. All I did was Google the word Saudi Arabia and critical thinking, and there were a number of results that popped up. I didn't need to go to the scholarly libraries of the universities in Saudi or here in the United States. These were readily available on the internet. And the first article was published in 2012, and the title of the article is Novel Program to Promote Critical Thinking Among Higher Education Students, an Empirical Study from Saudi Arabia. Well, the article makes a point that critical thinking is important for shaping the way that students learn and the way that students think. The subject research here indicated a need for a systematic instruction aimed at developing effective critical thinking skills. A university in Riyadh conducted this program during a thinking skills course. The effectiveness of the program was examined using a critical assessment tool, an instrument, a survey, that evaluated several critical thinking skills. Those skills were causal explanation, determining the reliability of sources, argument, and prediction. After the data was accumulated, the data demonstrated statistically significant gains in some of those critical thinking skills. Therefore, the study concluded, the study provided a framework for creating teaching methods that provided effective direct instruction for the development of critical thinking skills in college students. It's interesting that college students were exposed to this as a part of their course of study, and doing this during the early part of their curriculum then would enable them to practice critical thinking skills during their latter years at the university. It was a very interesting study to read. Moving then to the second article at the bottom of the page, 5, we see the title as The Effects of Teaching Critical Thinking to Saudi Female University Students Using a Standalone Course. There was a course that was taught as part of the general education requirements for freshmen, and they all experienced this course. And the study suggested and recommended that in order for students to be critical thinkers, that critical thinking would ideally be embedded in or integrated into all of the students' academic career, not just in one single standalone course. In other words, it was necessary to expose students to the concept, the notion of critical thinking, and practice it, but then to keep reinforcing it and to keep enhancing it over time during their university experience. So here's two very simple but very interesting and powerful articles regarding teaching critical thinking skills at the university level. Moving then to page 6. Well, here's two more, and this will be at the end of our look at scholarship regarding critical thinking, but I believe these are important articles. So let's look at the article at the top of the page, Developing Critical Thinking Skills Through Writing in an Internet-Based Environment. Writing assignments on the internet can be considered as a real application of critical thinking skills, so said the article. Writing seems to be an expression of critical thinking when students are trained to use critical thinking methods. Well, how does this work? Critical thinking involves collecting, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information. So practicing these skills of collection, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation has the effect of developing critical thinking skills. You know, if we take this to our real world, we've all read messages and reports that were provided to us that were most difficult to make sense of and really discern the intentions of the writer. If the writer of those messages to us had been better critical thinkers, perhaps those messages would have been clearer, our actions would have been better, and the results would have been more aligned with what we wanted to achieve as an outcome. So we're linking science and art, the science of leadership, the science of critical thinking, and the art of the practice of critical thinking. Well, Where did all of this scholarship start? I don't know, but in that simple internet search in 2007, there was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education International version entitled "Saudi Arabia Puts Its Billions Behind Western-Style Higher Education." And it was a very interesting article, and it points out perhaps it contrasts and compares the different educational styles between East and West. And I think if we did a little research together and compiled all of that list of research involving critical thinking, I think we would see a sudden or a large increase in the amount of information available to us all as educators and practitioners of critical thinking skills. Well, enough of scholarship. I live in the world of scholarship, but I also live in the world of practice. I'm a university professor at 2 different universities, but I also lead groups of individuals to accomplish mutual goals and objectives. So I enjoy both worlds. I enjoy that theory. I enjoy the science, but I also enjoy living out the results of those theories in that world. So let's look at the definition of critical thinking. What is critical thinking, and does it really matter? Well, the upper left-hand side of the page here says that critical thinking should be thought of in the sense of a critique. There is nothing critical about critical thinking in the way of a negative criticism. There's nothing negatively critical about critical thinking. The little picture, the little threefold picture at the top of the page shows a question mark in this mind of a person. And it's a question mark that then results in some gears, some wheels turning as he's thinking about that question and formulating opinion about that question. And he's thinking about thinking, and suddenly the lights go on and a thought has been produced. Has there been any action? Has there been any activity? Has there been any movement? Not at this point. Critical thinking can be simply defined as thinking about thinking. Thinking about thinking says I should pause, I should reflect, I should consider all aspects of a situation before any action or behavior occurs. Remember our assumption and the corollary. It says improving the quality of our thinking should result in the quality of our actions. Bottom of the page, critical thinking is closely related to knowing yourself or self-awareness. Socrates made famous that phrase, know yourself, and we'll look at that in the future in the webinar in a few pages. But critical thinking is closely related to that internal being of knowing yourself and asking those questions and doing more thinking than doing at the beginning of an exercise. Wade, the researcher Wade, back in 1995, identified 8 characteristics of critical thinking. He said that critical thinking simply involves asking questions, better defining a problem, examining all the evidence, analyzing your assumptions and your biases, very important. Biases really influence our thinking. Avoiding emotional reasoning. Certainly emotions are involved, but avoiding purely emotional reasoning. Avoiding oversimplification. We live in a world that's most complex, and avoiding oversimplification is a characteristic of critical thinking. Considering other interpretations of the same information, major part of critical thinking. And finally, tolerating ambiguity. We want to have a world of this or that, but the world is not that way. The world is sometimes, and most likely all the time, a bit ambiguous. A critical thinker tolerates well ambiguity. These 8 characteristics are important, and they help us to think about the definition of critical thinking. Page 8. Well, if we could summarize, we could say that critical thinking is an intentional exploratory mental process. And for the simple fact, it can be taught, it can be practiced, and it can be enhanced over time. We need more critical thinkers in every part of our cultures. Every part of our cultures requires better, more critical thinkers. Critical thinking is the art of analyzing and evaluating the process of thinking for simply the purpose of improving the thinking process. A turn of words there perhaps, but a very important part of understanding the definition of critical thinking. This is an important statement. We have yet to talk about how critical thinking can be applied in the world of business or commerce. Critical thinking really is all about thinking about thinking. It answers the question, how can I improve the process of my thinking? However, it's very important to note that critical thinking is the raw material for the things that we see on this page: problem solving, creativity, decision making, strategic thinking, organizational planning, and openness. Very important raw material as we consider these things that we do all the time. Well, it's time to start our conversation. Yes, critical thinking is both science and art. Here's a demonstration on the next several pages that will help you define the practice of critical thinking. And I pose the question to you, and I challenge you in a scholarly way. Can you connect all 9 dots with only 4 straight lines without lifting your pen from the paper? Can you connect all 9 dots with only 4 straight lines without lifting your pen from the paper? And while you consider this question, let me just take a few seconds and introduce myself a little bit more, in a little bit more detail. I spent my career, my engineering career, working on different forms of propulsion, working on diesel engines, working on gas turbine engines, working on rocket engines, and retired from a large aerospace company as the manager of statistics and systems engineering, working on hypersonic engines. And then realized the need for a continuing study in organizational leadership, returned to the university and earned a Doctor of Philosophy degree in the study of organizational leadership. A rather interesting combination, wouldn't you say, but one that I'm enjoying very, very much. So, how did you do? Were you successful in connecting all 9 dots with only 4 lines without lifting your pen from the paper? Moving to page 10. The task looks impossible, doesn't it? Here's a couple of potential solutions that didn't work. There's 1 dot that always remained unconnected. Doesn't seem to be possible to do this unless you make curved lines or you change the position of the dots or something like that. Well, here, let me ask you a question. Have you mentally constructed a box around those 9 dots that limited your thinking? Here I just drew a box, a frame, a big black, dark, bold frame around the 9 dots. And you didn't, and many of these solutions, you did not go outside of the frame, outside of the box. And the question, did this mental frame, this mental box, constrain you in any way? Moving then to page 12. Well, look here. It is possible to join all 9 dots with only 4 straight lines without lifting your pen from the paper. And all that I did here was I drew the lines past the corners, the edges, the frame of the box. And when you do that, you go a little bit longer with the line, and then you draw the different connections, line 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and all 9 dots are connected with 4 straight lines without removing your pen from the paper. And that's why critical thinking is often called thinking outside the box. You've heard that expression in English, I'm sure. Thinking outside that box is that creative notion, that brainstorming idea of let's break the boundaries, let's reframe the solution. Moving to page 13, you can see here I've redrawn the frame a little bit larger. Now the frame covers this larger image of going outside that original box of the 9 dots, I've expanded the frame, and sure enough, the frame is there, but it's possible to connect the dots. Well, if we apply our critical thinking skills to this page, we can then move to page 14. And I ask you another question. What could you do if you removed all the boundaries from your thinking? There's no limits here, is there? There's no frame. We had a frame. We removed the frame. We purposed. We intentionally removed the frame from our thinking processes. And now there's no limit, is there? There's nothing here constraining our thought processes. Critical thinking skills can be taught, and they can be enhanced using appropriate teaching techniques, for sure. Moving to page 18. Now that we've explored the idea of critical thinking, we've had a demonstration about critical thinking, let's remind ourselves that the webinar this morning is all about leadership development. Here, I'd like to start the definition of a leader and the function of leadership. A leader is a person. What they do is the function of leadership. I love word clouds. I said that before. There is software available that can interrogate, can analyze a document and look for simple things like word counts or themes that are expressed in the literature. And the software then does the simple word counts and takes the keywords that appear in beginning paragraphs, summary paragraphs, section headings, things like that, and it constructs a word cloud. And what is immediately apparent is the emphasis that the document places on certain themes, on certain words. A simple search on Google regarding word cloud and leader revealed these 3 word clouds, and there are many, many more. These are 3 of my favorite. They kind of define what a leader, who a leader is and what a leader does. Next, page 16. This is my preferred definition of a leader. There are many, many, many definitions of a leader and leadership. Millions, if you count Google hits, there are millions of different definitions. I've read countless articles that simply attempt to define leadership, and this is my personal favorite. It's a 3-part definition, and it goes like this. A leader is a person who sees a vision, takes action toward the vision, and mobilizes others to become partners in pursuing change. You see the gentleman there on the right peering off into the future with his telescope. And why is he doing that? It's because leaders see things that other people don't. Leaders should have that capability, that skill of seeing into the future and seeing things that other people don't see. Take our definition and deconstruct it into those 3 parts of vision, action, and mobilization. Vision. A vision is that positive picture of a preferred future state that creates a strong desire to get there. What do I mean by that? I simply mean that the present becomes a bit uncomfortable. The present situation is a little bit intolerable. The present situation is a little bit inadequate. And the leader sees that preferred future state and creates a passionate desire to achieve that preferred state, looking to the future. Action is the second part of our definition. The leader takes personal action, exercising his personal power to do whatever it needs to be done to move towards that vision. He uses his personal resources to move towards that vision, his time, his energy, even his money, to begin moving towards that vision that is pulling him in that direction. And then the third part is mobilization, the influence to motivate people to join efforts and movement towards the vision. And mobilization is the most difficult part about being a leader and about exercising leadership, because it involves others and motivating and influencing those other people to join you in what they believe to be an achievable outcome, that preferred state that looks better than today. And that's who a leader is. And this is adapted from the work of Jim Laub, who is the former dean of the School of Education at Palm Beach Atlantic University, a good friend of mine, and I really like his definition, which is tailored here for our use today. So as part of the thing that we want to do today as part of this webinar is for you to create your own definition of who is a leader. So after the webinar is finished and this PowerPoint becomes available on the internet, I would ask you to download it and then begin tailoring, begin writing your own definition of leader, of who you are as a leader. So here, let's take that first aspect, that first part of being a leader, that vision, and fill in the block here and answer the question, what is your personal ideal vision of the future that creates passion and consumes your thinking? Write it here. Write it here. Do this. Make this a personal project for later this evening or today or sometime in the very near future. And look at the people looking into the future in all directions and looking for that vision, looking for that preferred future state. Page 18. The second part of that definition is action, that personal power to do whatever it takes to move towards that vision. And so I ask you, how are you using your personal resources to step out from the crowd, as you see this gentleman doing to the right, to achieve your vision? Write it here. What are you doing? If you don't do this, your vision is only a dream, and dreams are not real. So I'm asking you to make your dreams a reality. And then the third part, mobilization. How are you using your influence and your power to achieve your vision in community, in association, in agreement with others? Power is an interesting word. Leaders exercise power. Power is position, certainly, in a hierarchy inside of your organization, but power can be your expertise. Power can be that part of you that people come to you because you know something and they need that something that you know, that advice, that counsel, that experience that you have that they don't, and you can help them. So use your influence and properly use your power as a leader to mobilize others to join you in moving towards your future preferred state. So here's our definition of a leader. We're going to go quickly here because our time is evaporating. Leadership, what a person does. Again, a three-part definition. A person who sees a vision, a person who takes action toward the vision and mobilizes others. Oh, we're recapping the three parts of a vision of who a leader is here. We're recapping, summarizing. And the next page, the definition of leadership, again, three parts. Leadership is an intentional change process through which leaders and followers, joined by a shared purpose, initiate action to pursue a mutually shared vision. Leadership is about change. Leadership is about accomplishing something that has yet to be done. Leadership is about making decisions that influence the future and make it better when we arrive there in our linear progression of time. So it's a process. It's a progression of events involving an interactive relationship between people, between leaders and followers. Have you ever considered the theory of followership? The theory of followership is rich in study and growing richer every day. The characteristics of a follower are very important to know and to understand and to benefit from as we use our leadership capability. Think about followers. Leadership is about influence. It's the legitimate use of power to align the efforts of people and processes. The word align here is extremely important. Misalignment results in a lack of performance and a loss of efficiency and effectiveness. And then the third part that defines leadership is achievement. It's that contextual accomplishment that results from attaining a goal and is worthy of celebration. I suggest to you that we do not celebrate our accomplishments sufficiently. We should set those meaningful real-term, near-term, as well as long-range goals and accomplish them iteratively in time. And again, this is adapted from Lob in 2004 and adapted to our presentation here. Again, the three-part definition of leadership, what we do. Here is the same definition, but sorted out into a pictorial view. And I use my critical thinking skills here to understand and to explain to you that all of us, all of who we are, have different preferred learning styles. We learn differently. Some people learn simply by thinking. Some people learn simply and prefer doing. Some people, and the best way to learn is to think and then do. It's all about critical thinking. So I took the same words here and I put them into pictorial form. And I look at the word vision and see how it is aimed in alignment with that larger arrow called dynamically aligned future. I love a theory, and I'm working on a theory called dynamically aligned leadership. And when dynamic alignment occurs, it's flexible and it's mobile, and it moves to the situation. It's dynamic, but there's also alignment. All of our visions, all of the things that we do, the outcomes of our critical thinking need to be aligned with that dynamically aligned preferred future state, and the subject for a different webinar, I'm sure. So here we go. We've thought about the definition of critical thinking, we've thought about the definition of who a leader is, and we've thought about the function of leadership. All right, now let's move into that definition of critical thinking and look at the elements of critical thinking. And here's our fellow, the thinker, and he's still thinking, isn't he? And you can see a little closer view of the sculpted body of this muscular definition that certainly did not occur in this state, but occurred in a very active and very dynamic state that now he's pausing and he's thinking and he's thinking and he's thinking. So, according to the National Council for Excellence in Critical Thinking in 1987, a long time ago, they created these 5 essential components. They suggested that these were the 5 essential components of critical thinking, and they're conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating. Yeah, critical thinking is an essential and often overlooked leadership skill. So here we go. These are the 5 components, a little bit more detail. When you think critically, when you're thinking about thinking, the first thing you want to do is conceptualize. You want to develop a mind picture. What's going on in my mind? Then you want to apply it. You want to take this conceptual information from the previous step and put this conceptual information to use. Then you want to analyze it. You want to look a little deeper than you've ever looked before and examine it. And what you're doing here is you're deconstructing something to look at it more closely. Then, after it's all separated into parts, you want to synthesize it. You want to pull it back together in a well-organized and logical and different way. And then ultimately, you want to evaluate. You want to make sense of what you've just done. You want to make a decision. You want to review, assess, and appraise what you've done. And so here, on the next 5 pages, again, I offer you a plan, your critical thinking plan, using these 5 steps. First one, remember, conceptualize, develop the mind picture. And so inside the box, I say, list the elements of your mental picture that represents what's going on in the physical world around you. Do it here. Don't make sense of it here. Just develop that list. What's going on in the physical world around you that influences your thinking? Next, apply it. Put this conceptual information to use. You can see the picture on the right. All of those random thoughts now become a little bit more structured. Arrange your mind map into patterns of recognizable or discrete blocks of information. Make a comprehensive list, an all-inclusive list, and do it here. And put it away for a day and look at it again and see if you agree. Maybe take something off, maybe add some more blocks. but come up with those patterns, those recognizable discrete blocks of information, and then analysis. You want to look very deeply and in a very powerful way of deconstructing all of this information. And you can do that now because you have put them into discrete blocks. It's easier to do. And I ask you to use both quantitative and qualitative means to discover more about the information that you've just obtained. And in the process, you'll find that you're missing some information. Well, go and get that information. Make a to-do list here of what you've done, what you can do, and then what it's going to take time to get next. What information do you need that you don't have? And think about it. Put it away for a day. Bring it back out. Work on your list some more. Step 4, next page, synthesize. Put it back together in a well-organized way. And I love the picture of the puzzle piece on the right side because the puzzle piece itself is made up of smaller puzzle pieces. And you have the notion that this puzzle piece fits into a larger puzzle piece, into a larger puzzle that may fit into a larger puzzle. And so it goes, and so it is. So when you put these things back together in a logical way, look for relationships among all of this information and reconstruct it so that it fits together well. This is an iterative process. It takes time. This is a very essential part, and you may find a need to go back and start your mind map again and work through those other 3 stages before you can properly synthesize in an iterative way the part of putting things back together in a logical way. And finally, only at this point can you evaluate and make sense of and make decisions about what you've just accomplished. Look for relationships among all your information and rearrange it so that it fits, and then decide what you're going to do about it. Make that decision with the results of your evaluation. I love the picture on the right again, that of all the different options, all the different ways it could be processed, there's one red arrow, and that is the arrow that he's facing towards and the direction in which he will move. So this is, so do you think critical thinking is an easy thing to do? No, it's not. Critical thinking is a mental, intentional mental struggle that requires our attention, our energy, and the outcome is going to be better than it would have been if you had not applied the art and science of critical thinking. So how do I become a better critical thinker? What can I do? Well, look at the picture on the right, and you'll see in the English characters, these come from the English alphabet, and you can see what looks like the word pectopaw. Well, I spent many years living in Moscow, Russia, and when I got there, I looked at this word on a lot of different buildings, and I had no idea what it meant until I realized that, yes, in my mind, this string of characters looked like the English word pectopaw, which has no meaning at all. But in Russian, the word is restoran, which sounds like a restaurant, and so it is. Critical thinking is the ability to look at the same information and think different things about it, and you know how to do that. Those of you that are bilingual and trilingual and even more, your mind is a wonderful tool that you can look at the same information and think different thoughts about it. This is the enhanced part of critical thinking, where you practice and study how to look at things differently than you've ever looked at them before. But how do you become a critical thinker? Well, you can learn to ask vital questions. You can formulate questions precisely and clearly for clear understanding, because I believe critical thinking influences your speech patterns. If you find yourself speaking incoherently and people not understanding you, I ask you to look at your critical thinking mentally. Enhance your critical listening skills. Powerful listening skills result in some very interesting responses from others. Gather information and make sense of it, and then determine the value or worth of information depending on its source. Absolutely. Well, part of it is maintaining an open mind. And critical thinker. How do you become a critical open mind? Well, you available information, but you also be available to discover with relevant criteria, you develop something called sit, which is, in a sense, observation and curiosity thinking. Look at the picture of the question. Are these figures reconstructing? Well, maybe they're adding other parts, thinking. I believe critical characteristic, and independent of what culture we come from and enjoy living in today, we all make decisions. We all exercise and have influence. We all develop and maintain relationships with others, and we all exchange information. And leaders who function in a multicultural environment really do need superior critical thinking skills. They really do. Think about it. Well, self-awareness, I said that self-awareness is very directly correlated with critical thinking, and so it is. And Socrates said, know yourself. Gandhi also said our greatness lies not so much in being able to remake the world as being able to remake ourselves. That is the secret to our greatness. And Bennis in 2003 said, leaders are made, not born, and made more by themselves than by any external means. In other words, know yourself. Another word picture, self in the center, and all the things that we need to discover and learn about ourselves and look for that missing piece of the puzzle. And how dare we think that we can successfully lead others until we learn how to successfully lead ourselves. Boyle in 2005 said, self-awareness is the process of understanding one's own values, beliefs, thoughts, motivations, and then recognizing how they affect others. I love that statement. Well, let's conclude with our story, our critical thinking story. Here's a real story. You can find this on YouTube. You can find it on Facebook. It's been added recently. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but here's a very real story about a very real boy in a very, very real situation. And the little boy comes out on his porch, and he's having a good morning with his dogs, and he decides to do something he's never done before, and he sticks his little head through the vertical railing on the fence there, and he says, my head is trapped in the fence, and I can't get out. I need help. And the second caption says, I'm afraid, and my ears hurt, but my father's here, and he can help me. And he is in trouble, but he knows that help is available, and he sees his father come to his aid and assistance, and he just believes that his father, his leader, is going to be able to help him. And let's see what happens. Well, Dad tries to spread the bars apart with his hands, and he's strong. His arms appear strong. He appears to be a robust individual, and he's not able to spread the bars. And the little boy says, I'm really afraid now, and my ears really hurt, but my dad knows what to do, and he can help me. And he still believes in his leader, his dad. And his dad puts his foot against the bar, and he pulls with all of his strength. And oh no, it's not working. And the dogs are looking on, wondering, how is this all going to happen? And the little boy is still trapped. Well, it would be easy enough to take a saw and cut the bar at the top and spread it, and the boy would get out, but that would take a lot of time, and maybe a saw is not available. And the little boy says to himself, I need to think. I need to figure this out, and let's see what happens. You see the look on his face? Let me think about this, he says, and if I turn my body to the side just a little bit, and I stand up, maybe I can get out of here. And he tries a time or two, and he twists and turns his little body to one side and then the other. And look, a picture's worth 1,000 words here, and the little boy's free. What would you do if you were faced with a similar situation? What would you do if you were faced with a similar situation? And so I return to the page at the beginning here that says, I'm trapped. And now I want you to picture yourself as the organizational leader who comes to the aid of his employees, and his employees are stuck. His employees are trapped in a situation that they've never experienced before, and they can't get out, and the answer is not obvious. And there's pain, and there's fear, and there's risk, and the employees are in trouble and the deadline is looming, and the leader is trying on the next page to spread the bar and use all of his organizational strength to spread that bar and to make it happen, and it's not working. And the employee, the little boy, says to himself, I need to think. I need to think. My leader can help me, but his help is limited. He doesn't know what to do because he has never been in this situation before. We have never been in this situation before. Our organization has never been in this situation before. And the employee takes it on himself to think. And he thinks about it, and he twists one way, and he thinks about it another way, and he stands up and he gets out. So my challenge to all of us here is to begin to think critically as leaders, personally, and as organizational influencers, but then to make sure that we also are modeling the critical thinking process and teaching our employees and our cohorts and our compatriots the process and the skill of critical thinking. And things will work out, because the better we improve our thinking processes, the better we will like our outcome. And so a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I say thank you. And I conclude with my conclusion that the best leaders really do have the best critical thinking skills. And so I'm finished. Thank you. Mr. Joffrey?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Paul, for a very interesting presentation. Folks, we are now open for question and answer. So if you have any questions, you could put it in the question box, or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your console. So if you click on it, you'll be able to speak directly with Dr. Paul as well. So let me go straight to the question box. We have the first one from Brother Ahmad Al-Khairi. The question is, how do I control digression during my thinking process?
A challenging question that requires critical thinking skills to answer. So you're thinking about it and you find your thoughts being scattered. This is a time when it's time to journal. It's time to write down. It's time to really get away into a quiet place and consider what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. Make sure that you understand the digression. Which way is it leading you? And then, if you are having difficulty making sense of it yourself, find a trusted person who you can work with. Our network of counselors, mentors should be deep and wide, and we should know people who have expertise in different areas of our thinking processes, friends that we can consult on and have confidence in and know that they will not share information that doesn't need to be shared. But digression is a wonderful part of critical thinking. And until you experience this sense of digression and moving this way and that way, what you described to me is the fact that you are beginning a very important and serious critical thinking process. Congratulations to you.
Thank you very much. We have another one from Brother Mahmoud Hamasani. The question is, what if you think you have a vision, your boss, if you have a vision which your boss don't, what shall I do?
Yes, and I've been there myself more than once. I remember a time in my aerospace career that we were partnering with another company. The division of responsibility for a very major project was divided between the two companies. I was responsible for a part where we in our company excelled. The other company did not, yet the other company was given responsibility. I call this leading from second place. It happens in an orchestra. Leadership can be the analogy is like an orchestra. Leadership and orchestration, the business of leading orchestra are very similar. So what should you do when you find yourself at odds, different opinions than your leader? You certainly need to understand your leader's position in the organization. You need to work on this on your own, your personal vision. This is what you're saying. You have a personal vision that's different than your leader. Begin to use your personal resources and show how your outcome may be a better outcome, a different income that your boss is really looking for. Use your critical thinking processes to show to explain to your boss that, yes, we can achieve your vision, we can achieve your purpose, your objectives, your goals, but here's something even broader, something even better than what we would consider as a more robust, a better outcome, that preferred state that we would all enjoy. You have a very delicate position there. It's not easy. It may take time. It will take time for you to align yourself with the leadership of your boss and then influence him in a direction where you think the organization should go. It's doable. It's not easy, but with critical thinking skills, you can do it.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Brother Mahmoud. I believe I've asked your question, but you raised your hand. Do you have a supplementary question? I've just unmuted you. Brother Mahmoud, can you hear us? Hello? Okay, let me go to another caller who has raised a hand. We have Mr. Shrishindu Chakraborty. Mr. Chakraborty, could you have muted yourself, but you have raised your hand. Do you have any question? Apparently has muted himself. So let me go to the question box. We have another one from Brother Basim Al-Rohaili. The question is, considering the life we live today, I believe the ability to pause, sit back, and find a time to think is very challenging. What is your advice to overcome such challenge?
Yes, a challenge which we all experience. We are all too busy. I'm writing an article now called 112 Reasons Why You're Too Busy. Of course, the article title is an appeal to read the article, and we could always list even more than that. So what do? You schedule it, just like you schedule anything else in your life. You schedule meetings, you schedule travel, you schedule different things. Schedule a time for reflection. At the beginning, don't schedule it for an hour. You'll probably not be ready to devote an hour to study. Devote 15 minutes. Schedule it. Put it on your calendar. Close the door to your office. Take a walk. Cut your lunch period by 15 minutes. Before you, on your way home as you travel, pause beside the road for 5 minutes. There is time in our very busy schedules that we can use creatively and find refreshment in that time. Schedule it. That would be my request, is to schedule it just like anything else. Busy day.
Okay, we have another one, a short one, yet interesting one. Does playing chess improves critical thinking?
Wow. Maybe a three-dimensional chessboard. How about that? Critical thinking in chess. As I said before, I lived in Moscow for several years, 5 years. I played a lot of chess. I was beaten far more than I won by teenagers and even younger. I felt like I was a better chess player at the end of that time. Did it develop my critical thinking skills? I think yes. I think there is a way of using games, especially challenging games like chess, mental games like chess, to think differently. If you use chess that way, then play with another person and set that goal. We're gonna work on our critical thinking skills and make a move not intended to win. Don't set that as a match to win, but set it as a goal. I'm just going to move this piece, maybe randomly at first, or maybe purposefully in the situation, and then think about all the different options. Verbally express your choices with your partner in the chess game, and then look at all the different options. Use the 5 different steps, those essential components of critical thinking. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful idea, and one that I say congratulations to you for exploring and expanding my critical thinking. Great.
Well, thank you very much. We are really pressed for time, so I'll just take one last question. I think you are correct in saying that critical thinking is important. What is the first thing I should do when this webinar ends?
First thing you should do is go into a quiet place and think about it. And when the information becomes available, like I say, download it and think about it. Don't think this is a webinar that that you can put away with all the other webinars. You need to keep this on the top of your desk, and you need to come back to it and explore the notions and the ideas that we have talked about here. And I'm available. You can contact me through my website or through my email or through MIL. You can contact me and we can engage in some more critical thinking together. But the first thing I would do would be to get away and think about it.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Paul. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. I would like to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MIL. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give quickly before we dismiss out, sir?
I want to thank you, sir, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with a group of people who I would never, ever think I could speak with or speak to. What a wonderful opportunity to change the world.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we all enjoyed it, and thank you very much once again, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar and for your interesting questions. So as Dr. suggested, we should now end this webinar and move to an isolated place to start thinking on the critical terms. So